My name is Watanabe Akira. In Nagatacho, my faction was once known as the Watanabe Construction Firm. We weren't building roads or dams. We were building the nation of post-war Japan itself, and all of its construction costs were paid with black money. This is not a confession. I do not believe in God. I believe only in power and numbers. This is a record of the truth. The journalists made a fuss about the black mist and Lockheed, but they saw nothing. They were only looking at the smoke rising from the finished building. They have no idea how we poured the foundation. My career began in the early 1950s. The recovery from the ashes was over. Japan was feverish with the income-doubling plan. Everyone wanted wealth. And wealth was measured in concrete things: televisions, washing machines, refrigerators, and asphalt roads, massive bridges, concrete ports. I was elected to the Diet from my home district, a mountainous region in Gunma. My first job was to bring public works to my hometown. At the time, Gunma was just a dusty rural backwater. The men in Tokyo laughed, calling my district Japan's Tibet. Watanabe-kun, does your district really need such a grand highway? Are the bears going to drive on it? That's what Matsukawa-sensei, a party heavyweight, said as he clapped my shoulder. I smiled and replied, "Sensei, the day will come when even bears ride in cars. This is an investment in the future." Matsukawa-sensei looked me straight in the eye. "You are an interesting man, and how do you plan to collect on this investment?" That was the key. Politics is give and take. I pledged my loyalty to Matsukawa-sensei's faction. I swore to deliver the local votes for him in the next party leadership election. My reward was a national highway plan, a grand project that would cut through mountains and cross valleys. The budget was 5 billion yen, in the currency of the day. Now this is where true politics begins. The Diet approves the budget, but I was the one who decided how that 5 billion would be spent. First, I summoned the head of the local construction contractors association, a man named Kanemaru, a tough man who'd made his name in Manchuria during the war. In the back room of a private restaurant, Kanemaru placed a heavy Polonia box before me. "Sensei, a local specialty. Sake buns for you." I opened the box. Beneath the steaming white buns were stacks of cash packed tightly. I told Kanemaru, "I'm not particularly fond of sweets, Kanemaru-san, but I don't mind the aroma of this sake at all." Kanemaru bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the tatami. "Thanks to you, Sensei, we can finally drink Tokyo's water. We will never forget this debt." A debt? No. It was a contract. Kanemaru and I built a system. The highway project was, on paper, open to public bidding, but every company participating in the bid was part of Kanemaru's association. They held dango bid rigging sessions in advance, meticulously deciding who would win the contract and at what price. Naturally, the winning bid was always just at the limit, 98% of the budget. Where did the difference go? First, Kanemaru's association prospered. They in turn increased their upper payments, their political donations to me. That donation money didn't go to me personally. It was funneled through my political organization and flowed directly to Matsukawa-sensei's faction in Tokyo. This was what came to be called the Iron Triangle. The bureaucrats, officials, create the plan. The politicians, me, approve the budget, and the contractors, Kanemaru, execute the work. And the money flows right back to the politicians, me and Matsukawa-sensei. A perfect cycle. But this cycle required lubricant. The highway plan, of course, required land acquisition. Dozens of farmers refused to sell the land their ancestors had worked. "We don't need your money. I'll die on this land." No matter how much the officials bowed, they wouldn't budge. One night, Kanemaru called me. "Sensei, we have a few troublemakers. They just won't listen to reason." I sighed. "Kanemaru-san, I am a man who makes the law. Do not do anything that breaks it. But the construction schedule is absolute. Matsukawa-sensei himself is coming for the opening ceremony. Do you understand what that means?" Kanemaru's voice was low. Understood. A week later, the storehouse of the last, most stubborn holdout burned to the ground. Arson. No one was hurt, but the next day the man signed the sales contract with a trembling hand. The police? Who do you think appoints the local police chief? The authority comes from the National Public Safety Commission, and who selects the members of that commission? It is all connected. That was my first job. On the day the highway opened, I rode in an open-topped car with Matsukawa-sensei, parading through the cheers of the local citizens. Thank you, Watanabe-sensei, the greatest politician in Japan. Children waved little Hinomaru flags as they ran on the brand new asphalt. At that moment, I thought from the bottom of my heart, I have done the right thing. I brought wealth to that dusty, forgotten countryside. If, in the process, someone shed a tear, someone's storehouse burned and the rules were bent just a little, so what? That is how a nation is built. That Gunma Highway. It was more than asphalt. It was a pipeline, a conduit for money, loyalty, and information. Because of that job, I was recognized within Matsukawa-sensei's faction as a man who can be used. Watanabe-kun, he told me, you understand the smell of the dirt. He made me the faction's treasurer, or rather his assistant treasurer. By the late 1950s and early 60s, Japan was racing up a steep hill. Tokyo was tearing itself down and rebuilding, all for the Olympics, the 1964 festivities. Everyone called it a celebration of post-war recovery. But we, the men of the Watanabe construction firm, heard a different sound. We heard the rumble of concrete mixers, the pounding of pile drivers, and the dry, crisp sound of cash being counted. The Olympics were the single largest public works project in history, a blank check written on the account of national prestige. My job was to ensure that check was filled in with my faction's ink. Matsukawa-sensei sent me on an errand to the Ministry of Construction. Watanabe-kun, he said, I hear they are competing over the new stadium design. Company A and Company B. Yes, sensei, so it seems. The president of Company A is a golf partner of mine. He is a man who truly understands Japanese beauty. Japanese beauty, a remarkably useful phrase. I took the relevant director from the ministry, a man 2 years my senior at Tokyo University, out for grill deal. He was no fool. He knew exactly why I was there. Watanabe-kun, he said, Company A's design is certainly splendid, but Company B's cost is... Cost, senpai? I interrupted. Surely a 100-year plan for the nation should not be distorted by a few 100 million yen. I took a fountain pen from my breast pocket and placed it on the table. A heavy German-made pen. This is a small gift from Matsukawa-sensei. He says it writes exceptionally smoothly. The director stared at the pen. He understood precisely what writes meant. A week later, Company A made a come-from-behind victory and won the design competition. That weekend, 50 million yen was transferred to my political organization as sponsorship fees for an Olympic success celebration party, a party that, of course, would never be held. This was still clean work, the sophisticated unspoken understanding between bureaucrats and big business. But Tokyo is not built only on such clean surfaces. To be ready for the Olympics, the Shuto Expressway network had to be built. The planned route cut a straight line through the old downtown, a dense warren of thousands of homes and shops. Naturally, evictions became a problem. This is my ancestors' land. We survived the GI firebombings. You think we'll be chased out by our own government? The landowners united, egged on by the leftists. The compensation money the government offered was a pittance. The schedule was getting tighter. One night, Matsukawa-sensei summoned me to a restaurant. Watanabe, the road has stopped. My apologies, sensei. The land acquisition, I know the reason. Can't you handle it the way you did in your district? Sensei, the mountains of Gunma are not the middle of Tokyo. There are too many of them. Matsukawa-sensei wiped his face with a hot towel and said only one thing. The schedule is absolute. The Olympics are the face, mentsu, of this nation. Understood? This was my real test. I did not contact a rural fixer like Kanemaru. I contacted a Tokyo professional. He called himself a real estate consultant, a man named Ando. But it was an open secret that the organization behind him was the Inagawa Kai, Yakuza. We met in the lounge of the Imperial Hotel. Ando was dressed in a high-end suit and bowed deeply. Watanabe-sensei, it is an honor to be called. I sipped my coffee and spread a map on the table. Ando-kun, this particular area, it has poor ventilation. The air is stagnant. Indeed, sensei. That must be a problem for you. I want to purify this area. The residents deserve to move to a new place, a better environment. You could call it humanitarian aid. Ando listened without interrupting. A wonderful philosophy, sensei. But perhaps their stubborn love for their old homes is getting in the way of your humanitarian effort. I looked him straight in the eye. That is correct, which is why I require a strong power of persuasion, something to move their hearts. Understood, Ando said. Persuasion of that nature will incur some expenses. The expenses will be drawn from the Public Works Contingency Fund. I do not require receipts. 2 weeks later, the incidents began. The house of the landowner's opposition leader was firebombed in the middle of the night. Dump trucks began racing down their narrow shopping street at 3 a.m., blaring their horns. Tattooed men who clearly did not belong, started loitering on the street corners where children walked to school. The police, they did nothing, or rather they couldn't do anything. The superintendent of the Metropolitan Police was a man close to Matsukawa's faction. In the name of Olympic success, a small fire in a slum was merely a trivial accident. A month later, the same residents who had sworn to die on their land signed the eviction papers, their faces pale. They were scattered to cramped public housing projects in the suburbs. In the space where their homes had been, massive concrete pillars were driven into the earth. I never called Ando again. He was the perfect subcontractor for my construction firm. This is the truth, the underside of the 1964 miracle. The world admired that orderly, beautiful modern Tokyo, but beneath the asphalt of that new highway lie the ashes of burned-out homes and the bitter resignation of thousands of people. And the man who drew the blueprint was me. The success of the 1964 Olympics was a turning point, both for Japan and for me personally. Japan had returned to the first rank of nations, and I had been transformed from useful young politician to the man who will carry the faction's future. Watanabe Construction Firm. That's what my sub-faction came to be called in the halls of the Diet. At first, it was just a group of young lawmakers who admired me. But what does it take to keep such men elected? In Japanese politics, we say it takes 3 things: the Jiban, Kanban, and Kaban. The Jiban is the electoral base. They must cultivate that themselves. The Kanban is the signboard, the name recognition. I could help build that with the media. But the Kaban, the briefcase, that means money. An idealist in politics with no money is just an artist with a beautiful blueprint. He cannot build a house. To build a house, you need nails, wood, and cement. My job was to ensure the supply of cement never, ever ran out. As we entered the late 1960s, the public began to fuss about the Black Mist scandals. A few faction treasurers were caught by the prosecutors for clumsy, sloppy accounting. A few ministers resigned, and the public lamented political corruption. I watched them and thought one thing: fools. They weren't caught because they were evil. They were caught because their methods were crude and primitive. They were accepting bribes that left a paper trail, embezzling directly from damn construction budgets. That's why they were caught. My construction firm was different. I stopped accepting buns filled with cash directly from contractors like Kanemaru. First, they smelled too strongly of the construction site and of the Yakuza. Second, public works budgets depend on the economy. Drinking from the faucet of the national budget is simply inefficient. I set my sights on the private sector. By the late 60s, the Japanese economy was no longer in recovery. It was in development. Corporations were posting enormous profits, and that money was pooling in the Tokyo Stock Exchange. I wanted that faucet, not public money but private money. And for that, I needed a new tool. One day at a private club in Akasaka, I was introduced to a man. His name was Yamazaki. He was in his 40s. At first glance, he seemed like a calm, respectable senior executive from some major corporation, dressed in a high-quality British suit. But I knew instantly. If a man like Ando, the Olympic eviction specialist, carried his dagger openly as violence, this man Yamazaki kept his dagger deeply, deeply hidden in a scabbard made of law and economics. He was a Sokaya, a corporate racketeer, or more accurately, he was the man who managed the Sokaya. Through hundreds of ghost companies, he would buy up small strategic stakes in major corporations. Then he would dispatch polite but menacing men to the annual shareholder meetings. "Mr. President, there is a rumor that your Kawasaki plant is dumping polluted water into the river. Is this true? Mr. Director, is it not a fact that you are in an inappropriate relationship with the daughter of a hostess in Akasaka? Scandals. The pus hidden deep inside the company. How did Yamazaki know such things? It was obvious. He had cooperators on the inside, union bosses, disgruntled executives passed over for promotion. If a shareholder meeting descended into chaos, the company's face would be destroyed. The stock price would plummet. Yamazaki used this threat as his weapon. Corporations, desperate to keep their meetings quiet, would pay enormous consulting fees to one of Yamazaki's research firms. Of course, those firms did no consulting. They took the money, and at the next meeting, their representatives would stand up and shout, "Mr. President, we support you. Keep up the good work." Yamazaki explained his business to me. "Watanabe-sensei, I merely provide health checkups for corporations, but sometimes I find patients who are hiding a grave illness." "Oh, what kind of illness?" "For example, a certain chemical manufacturer in Chiba. They have developed a new fertilizer, but the byproduct of its creation, let's call it mercury, they are dumping it directly into the sea." A chill ran down my spine. This was right after the Minamata disease disaster had exploded into a national crisis. Is that true? My research indicates it is. But, Sensei, they are a very patriotic company, very cooperative with national policy. It would be a great loss for the Japanese economy if their development was stopped by such a trivial matter, wouldn't it? I understood him perfectly. And how much can that patriotism be bought for? They are always searching for an understanding politician like yourself, Sensei. Someone to use your power to protect them from the inspectors at the new Environment Agency. As a thank you, they would be overjoyed to make a donation to your policy research group. This was the new order system for my construction firm. This wasn't about 10 or 20 million yen in bribes from a construction boss. This was about hundreds of millions of yen from a major corporation to kill a scandal. I summoned the bureaucrat from the Environment Agency. "About that plant in Chiba," I told him. "That factory represents the pinnacle of Japanese technology. Do not do anything to get in their way with petty regulations. You must think of the national interest." The man turned pale. He understood the pressure hidden behind my words. A few days later, 300 million yen was transferred into the bank account of my policy research group. The fools who were caught in the black mist were arrested for speeding on a public road. I, along with Yamazaki, had just built a new highway called the Law, and on my highway there is no such thing as a speed limit. I was no longer Matsukawa's treasurer. I was becoming the biggest bank in Nagatacho. My partnership with Yamazaki, it made my firms safe, bottomless. But money by itself is just paper. It is meaningless until it is converted into power. And in Nagatacho, power means only two things: posts, positions in the cabinet, and numbers, votes in the Diet. The Fourth Middle East War. The world was struck by the oil shock. On television, I watched housewives hysterically fighting over toilet paper in supermarkets. The public called it panic. I called it opportunity. A national crisis is always a politician's greatest weapon. Why? Because laws that could never pass in peacetime are rammed through in the name of crisis. Prices were skyrocketing. The public's anger was directed at the government, at our party. What is the government doing? Stabilize prices. The party leadership held emergency meetings, their faces pale. "Watanabe-kun, your faction has connections in the business world. Can't you do something to control this inflation?" In that meeting, I quietly raised my hand. "Gentlemen, prices are supply and demand. Right now, the public is creating false demand driven by panic. The only way to stop this is with regulation." I proposed what I called the Emergency Price Stability Act. On paper, it was a law that allowed the government to guide corporations to prevent them from unfair price gouging. But what was its true purpose? I gathered the presidents of the major Sogo Shosha, the trading houses, that imported all of Japan's oil. We met in a private room in Akasaka. "Gentlemen, the nation is suffering. Now is the time for you to show your patriotism. I expect you to cooperate with the government's guidance and contribute to price stability." These men were all old foxes, all masters of the abacus. They understood my true meaning instantly. My stability meant, you will not raise or lower your prices without my permission, which in turn really meant, I am giving you permission to form a cartel and stabilize your prices simultaneously at a high level. An antitrust violation? Don't be absurd. This was a national emergency. With my blessing, they formed a dark cartel. The price of oil stabilized at a new extremely high level. They made obscene profits from the chaos, and where did a portion of that profit go? Yamazaki had created hundreds of ghost companies. These companies owned worthless, dilapidated old buildings in prime Tokyo locations. The major trading houses then purchased these buildings for future development at, say, 10 times their market value. The difference was billions of yen. It was never recorded as a political donation. It was a simple real estate transaction. I was no longer in the business of just killing scandals. I was rewriting the rules of the Japanese economy and skimming the arbitrage. And the time had come to convert that money into power. In 1976, my mentor Matsukawa Sensei announced his retirement due to illness. The party instantly exploded into action for the leadership election, the race to become the next prime minister. The Matsukawa faction was enormous. Whoever inherited it would hold the casting vote. There were 2 candidates. One was Hamada, a senior politician who had served Matsukawa Sensei for decades, a man who was the picture of clean politics, but who had zero talent for raising money. The other was me. It was a war of succession. It was no different from a Yakuza turf war. The only difference is that instead of daggers and pistols, we use wads of cash. The final battle took place 3 days before the election, at the faction's general meeting in the Hotel New Otani. Hamada stood on the podium, giving a textbook speech about clean politics and honoring Matsukawa Sensei's legacy. I didn't bother giving a speech. I had been working for the previous 2 days. The safe in my office was piled high with live ammunition, cash, skimmed from those trading houses and Yamazaki's roots. I summoned the younger lawmakers in my construction firm to my hotel suite, one by one. Envelopes were stacked on the table. Your next election will be difficult, I hear. Take this. Use it for mochi dai, rice cake money for your constituents. Inside each envelope was 5 million yen. For a 3-term lawmaker, 10 million. Watanabe-sensei, I cannot. Just take it. Stop worrying about money and go work for the good of the nation. That is the Watanabe construction firm way. In one night, I distributed nearly 1 billion yen to 70 lawmakers. They pledged their undying loyalty, some with tears in their eyes. The result of the vote was, of course, a landslide. Hamada stood trembling at the podium, muttering, "Japan's politics is finished." As I walked past him, I leaned in and whispered in his ear, "Sensei, politics is not moved by ideals. Politics is moved by numbers, and money is what is used to align those numbers." That day, I stopped being a mere treasurer. I became one of the true architects of Japan. Soon after I became the faction leader, the Lockheed scandal exploded. A massive earthquake shook Nagatacho. The American aircraft company had funneled millions of yen to the sitting prime minister, Tanaka Sensei. Tanaka was arrested. A former prime minister arrested. The public was in an uproar over the greatest scandal of the post-war era. The prosecutors waved their banner of justice. We, the men of the Watanabe construction firm, watched this all with cold detachment. Tanaka wasn't arrested because he was evil. He was arrested because his method was too old. He took the cash directly from the Americans. It left a paper trail. It was crude. And more importantly, he went too far. He tried to disrupt the order of the country's true rulers, the bureaucratic ministry, and the old guard corporate elites. And so he was cut. Tanaka's fall created a massive power vacuum. Our party, the LDP, was bleeding. Public trust was gone. The party was split over who should be the next Mikoshi, the portable shrine to carry on one's shoulders. It was at that moment that I made my final transformation. I ceased to be just a faction boss and became what the newspapers would later call the Kagemi no Shogun, the Shadow Shogun. I had no interest in the Prime Minister's chair itself. The Prime Minister is just a face. His job is to stand in front of the media, bow to the public, and endure the jeers of the opposition in the Diet. A wise man does not become Prime Minister. He makes the Prime Minister. I began my search for my shrine. I set my sights on a man named Miyazawa. He was not in my faction. He was a prince from a minor faction, a man with a good name but no money and no real base. He spoke English, he looked good on camera, and best of all, he was clean. He was, in other words, the perfect puppet. I summoned him to my office. "Miyazawa-kun, do you want to be Prime Minister?" He looked at me, unsure if he'd heard correctly. Then, the glint of ambition appeared in his eyes. "Watanabe-sensei, are you serious?" I will carry you. In return, when you become Prime Minister, you will appoint men from my construction firm to all the key cabinet posts: finance, construction, trade. That is all." He bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. But the problem was numbers. My faction alone was not enough to win the leadership election. With Tanaka gone, I had to buy 2 or 3 other factions to join my coalition. This would take more than $1 or 2 billion yen. It required a different order of magnitude of money. And the source of that money could no longer be domestic. The Lockheed scandal had the prosecutors, the Tokuso eyes, bloodshot, searching for any unusual flow of money inside Japan. I decided to go overseas. My construction firm was about to become an exporter. In the late 1970s, Japan was an economic superpower. We were also in the middle of a new war. Trade friction. Detroit was being destroyed by our Corollas and Civics. Jap bashing was a daily sport in the US Congress. Tax the Japs. Unfair trade. The Japanese automakers were terrified. If America actually imposed retaliatory tariffs, Japan's export economy would be finished. I decided to turn this crisis into cash. I summoned Yamazaki. By now he was my liaison to the entire corporate world. "Yamazaki-kun, I want you to relay my proposal to your clients, the heads of the auto companies." A few days later, I sat down to dinner with the chairman of Japan's top 5 car manufacturers at the Hotel Okura. "Gentlemen," I began, "the air in Washington is toxic. I can assure you they will pass a retaliatory tariff bill. If they do, your companies are finished." They sat in pale, dead silence. I continued, "But there is a way out. Voluntary restraint." "Voluntary restraint?" one of them asked. "Yes. Before they force tariffs on us, we will voluntarily limit the number of cars we export, say 2 million units per year." They looked as if I had shot them. "Sensei, our sales. We will be ruined." "Be quiet," I said, my voice like ice. "Can you not do basic arithmetic? Which is better, losing 30% of your competitiveness to a tariff or limiting your volume, thereby increasing the scarcity of each car, allowing you to rebrand them as luxury items and sell them at a higher price?" I let that sink in. "And getting Washington to accept voluntary restraint as the solution to their problem, that is the politics that only I can deliver." They finally understood. I flew to Washington, officially for a meeting of the US-Japan Friendship League. Unofficially, I met with an American lobbyist I had been cultivating for years. I gave him the operations fund, $5 million in cash, billions of yen, funneled through Yamazaki's network. Use this to persuade the key senators, convince them that voluntary restraint is the only way to save the American auto industry. American politicians are just as greedy as ours. The lobbyist did a perfect job. Say a month later, the US and Japanese governments announced a friendly agreement. Japan would voluntarily restrict its auto exports. Detroit celebrated its victory. The Japanese automakers publicly lamented their painful decision, while privately, they raised the price on every single car, protected from competition, and posted their highest profits in history. And that profit? It was transferred in the hundreds of billions of yen to a research institute Yamazaki had set up in Switzerland, disguised as consulting fees. The fools in the Lockheed scandal were caught for money they received to buy airplanes. I sold the trade policy of the entire nation, made 10 times as much, and not a single person ever knew. This money became the bullets, Tama. I needed to support Miyazawa. I went to the heads of the other factions. I didn't need to threaten. I just opened an attaché case. The result of the leadership election was a landslide. As Miyazawa, my clean puppet, waved to the flashing cameras on the steps of the Prime Minister's residence, I watched him on a television set, drinking sake alone in a private room in Akasaka. That clean man. He had no idea, not even 10%, of the real reason why he was standing there. With Miyazawa sitting in the Prime Minister's chair, my construction firm became the de facto government of Japan. Miyazawa was the public face. His job was to go to the Diet, and when asked uncomfortable questions by the opposition, to simply say, "I have no recollection." The real blueprints for the nation were all drawn by me in my real office, a private room in a high-class restaurant in Akasaka, the appointment of cabinet ministers, personnel decisions at the powerful Ministry of Finance, the selection of the governor of the Bank of Japan, All of it was decided by me. In 1985, Japan entered a fever, unlike anything in human history. The public called it the bubble economy. A foolish name. It was not an economy. It was a delusion. It was scalding hot water bursting from a pipeline that I had intentionally pressurized. The trigger, as always, was America. They were complaining again that our trade surplus was too large. The dollar is too high, the yen is too cheap. That's why we can't sell our products. The heads of the central banks were gathered at the Plaza Hotel in New York. They made a secret agreement to artificially guide the dollar down and the yen up. The Plaza Accord. This agreement should have killed the Japanese economy. A strong yen in Dhaka should have destroyed our export industries, cars, electronics. It should have plunged us into a deep recession, but I reversed it. I summoned the governor of the Bank of Japan. We must avoid a strong yen recession at all costs, I told him. But Watanabe-sensei, the market forces, if the market is cold, I cut him off, then we will light a fire. It is that simple. I instructed the Bank of Japan to lower the official discount rate, the interest rate, to historic, unprecedented lows. What happens when you do that? The banks are suddenly drowning in cash they aren't earning interest on. They must lend it somewhere. Lend it to corporations, I ordered, for capital investment. Lend it to the people. Tell them to buy houses. Tell them to buy land. That was the ignition switch for the bubble. Then I added the fuel. I summoned the head of the Ministry of Finance's Banking Bureau. I want you to temporarily review the regulations on real estate lending. Until then, when a bank loaned money using land as collateral, there were strict standards for that land's value. I had those standards effectively abolished. I gave them permission to lend money based on the assumption that the land would be worth more tomorrow. It was madness, but the entire nation, from top to bottom, danced to this madness. Companies borrowed money not to build factories, but to buy land. Individuals borrowed money not to buy homes to live in, but to buy condos to flip. The price of land doubled overnight. They said the value of the land in Tokyo alone was greater than the value of the entire United States. I saw men in Ginza using 10,000 yen bills as fans to cool themselves. Men waving 100,000 yen in cash just to hail a taxi. Everyone thought they were a genius. They were not geniuses. They were simply fools playing at a casino table that I had designed, using chips that I had printed. This fever was the golden age for my construction firm. I no longer needed Yamazaki to extort money from corporations. They brought it to me, bowing. Watanabe-sensei, our company wishes to purchase a hotel in Hawaii. To that end, we would be grateful for a special introduction for a loan from the government bank. Sensei, that vast, empty plot of land in Shiodome, the one the National Railway used to own, would it be possible for it to be sold to my company? I would listen to their petitions, and my only job was to judge the weight of the gift box of yokan, sweet bean jelly, they brought. Inside the boxes, it wasn't even cash anymore. It was too bulky. It was bearer bonds, Swiss bank deposit slips. The money had become too large to be money. It was just numbers. It had become a cold symbol. An entry moved from one of my dozens of overseas accounts to another. I truly believed that I controlled this country. The law, the economy, the media, everything moved according to my blueprint. Miyazawa was clean Miyazawa, beloved by the public. I was the shadow shogun, ruler of the Akasaka Knights. It was a perfect system. But I overlooked one thing. No matter how perfect the machine, as long as humans are operating it, there will always be errors. And that error came from the very center of my construction firm. It all ended the day Yamazaki burst into my office, his face a mask of terror. "Sensei, it is a disaster!" I will never forget his face. This man, who was always so calm, so cold, was in a full-blown panic. "What are you flustered about, Yamazaki-kun? This is not like you." "It is the recruit matter, the one I was handling for our people." Recruit. The moment I heard that name, a cold sweat ran down my back for the first time in 30 years. It was the last piece of garbage from our celebration, the one piece we had failed to process properly. And that piece of garbage was about to consume the entire system from the inside out. Recruit. Looking back, that company was the new monster that destroyed the entire Showa system I had built. My generation, Matsukawa-sensei, Tanaka-sensei, myself, we dealt in dirt and steel, roads, dams, high-speed rail, oil, things you could touch. But that company, Recruit, dealt in something intangible, information, and their way of making money was fundamentally different from ours. It was Yamazaki who arranged the new money for the younger politicians in my firm. It was unlisted shares in a subsidiary called Recruit Cosmos. Do you understand the difference? If I give you a suitcase of cash, it is a bribe. It is crude, it leaves proof, but if I give you the right to buy shares, at their original dirt-cheap price, shares that are guaranteed to be worth 10 times as much the moment the company goes public, what is that? On paper, it is a simple stock investment. In reality, it was a perfect form of alchemy, a way to transfer tens, sometimes hundreds of millions of yen with complete legality. I tried to incorporate this new method into my system. I used Yamazaki to distribute this fruit of the future to my faction members. I was trying to evolve my construction firm from a Showa-era contractor into a Heisei-era investment bank. But I miscalculated two things. First, I miscalculated the youth and ambition of Recruit's president, a man named Ezoe. He had absolutely no understanding of the unspoken order that men of my generation lived by. He didn't offer this alchemy just to shadow shoguns like me. He handed it out like flyers. He gave it to opposition party politicians, to bureaucrats, to university professors, and unforgivably, to journalists. He thought he was making friends. But all he did was create too many accomplices. A secret is no longer a secret if 3 people know it. It is an open invitation to disaster when 100 people know it. My second miscalculation was the bubble fever that I myself had created. The entire nation was drunk on the smell of money. No one questioned the idea of getting rich without working. But the Tokuso, the Special Investigations Unit of the prosecutor's office, the hyenas who had brought down Prime Minister Tanaka, they were not part of the fever. They were outside it, and they were hungry. They had been searching for a decade for a new sacrifice, a new target that the entire nation could channel its hatred toward. Recruit was the perfect sacrifice. Yamazaki, my treasurer, my fixer, the man who knew every secret, every account number, he was arrested, and in the interrogation room he was broken by the prosecutors. After that, the collapse was swift. It was like watching a dam that I had designed, a dam that had held for 40 years, suddenly burst apart from a single tiny crack. The newspapers, the very same ones that had been praising the miracle of the bubble economy, turned on a dime. Now they screamed about the filth of money politics. It was laughable. The very reporter writing that article had a certificate for those same unlisted shares hidden in his desk drawer. My puppet, Prime Minister Miyazawa, was implicated. His secretary had accepted the shares. He was forced to stand before the Diet and utter the words. I have no recollection. The magic words I had taught to so many bureaucrats and politicians. But now that the fever had broken, they were no longer magic. They were the excuse of a guilty man. Miyazawa's cabinet resigned in disgrace, and then the fire came for me. I was summoned as a witness to the Diet. I stood on the podium. The camera flashes were like machine guns. The opposition lawmakers were screaming at me like animals. Watanabe-sensei, they call you the Shadow Shogun. Are you not the one who designed this entire system of corruption? I leaned into the microphone. I spoke slowly and clearly. As a politician, I have never, not once, done anything that breaks the law. It was not a lie. I never broke the law. I was the man who made the law, but no one cared about logic anymore. My construction firm was dissolved. The lawmakers, like rats fleeing a sinking ship, abandoned me and ran to new factions. I was advised to leave the party. I was in effect exiled from Nagatacho. The Showa era ended. My era ended. It has been 30 years since then. Everyone says Japan entered its lost decades. The price of land never recovered. The people no longer feel wealthy. The politics has lost its vitality. Those young commentators on television, they blame everything on the bubble. They blame everything on Showa-era money politicians like me, fools. The peace and wealth you all enjoy so casually today. The foundation it all rests on. You have no idea. You have no idea how much filth, how much sacrificed, and how much black money was poured into that concrete to make it strong. I have no regrets. I designed this country. From a burned-out wasteland to the world's greatest economic superpower, that blueprint was just distorted by an unexpected load. A load called Recruit. A load called the bubble, that is all.